Morning. It's good to see everyone out this morning. We've got several visitors with us, and we're certainly grateful for your presence. Amen. All right, we'll be picking up in Judges chapter 10 here in just a moment. So again, before we continue with question number 3, let's just quickly go through the 17 time periods as we've been doing throughout the quarter. So before the flood, the scattering of the people, the patriarchs, the Exodus, wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest, the judges, the united kingdom, the divided kingdom, Judah alone, the captivity, return from captivity, years of silence, the life of Christ, the early church, and the letters to the Christians. And we had last week ended with talking about the people had cried out to God, and God had told them, I'm not going to help you. I've helped you in the past. I'm not going to help you. And even though God had said that, we know that they agreed with what God had said, that He had helped them in the past, and that, yes, their sins had taken them away. And even without any promise of deliverance, the people realized that their idols and were, in fact, destroying them. So they made the changes that were necessary. And then we had read verse 16 of chapter 10, which says, So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord, and He could bear the misery of Israel no longer. So question number 3 was, after the people show a genuine change of heart, God also has a change of heart. What does God's response there in verse 16 teach us about Him? Ken?
Well, God is a merciful God, and if He sees that we are willing to change our ways and repent of our sinful ways, even though He may have said that He will not deliver us or whatever, then He is liable to change His mind, to relent from the calamity that He was supposed to bring upon us.
Okay. Right.
His soul could no longer endure the misery of Israel. He is a loving God and a forgiving God.
All right. So He's loving, He's forgiving, Gil.
What they're saying is He's always willing to forgive us if we come back to Him.
We do know that God loves His people. God is not setting up in heaven and looking at His people and saying, I'm not going to help you. And then when they have this kind of realization, He's not up there, well, I told you so. No, God does want His people to change. God does care for His people, and we know that obviously through the display of sending His Son, Jesus. And He doesn't want us to endure the things that we are going to have to endure, but He will allow those things to happen to lead us back to Him, and that's the point of it. But we know that He does love us, and that He wants us to have this relationship with Him and to serve Him only. Anything else from number 3? Question number 4. What do we learn about Jephthah from Judges 11, verses 1 through 11? Compare Jephthah's family situation and rise to leadership to Abimelech. So we've just recently studied Abimelech, and just because of sake of time, we're not going to read through this again. But what do you see in comparison with Jephthah, his situation, and Abimelech, and also their leadership? Ms. Shirley?
He was the son of a harlot, for one thing.
Okay.
And he was self-appointed. He wasn't like the other judges.
Okay. All right. Francis?
I have that Jephthah spoke before the Lord, and he was with God, and also for the people. Abimelech did not know what was right before God, and only did for himself.
Okay. So with Abimelech, what was his family situation? So he's the son of Gideon. Who was Abimelech's mom? So Abimelech's mom is a concubine, and so because of that, he still does have a right, more so than Jephthah, because who was Jephthah's mom? It's just a harlot, it's a prostitute. But with Abimelech, he is, as Ms. Shirley said, he's kind of self-appointed. He's putting himself in this position because he feels like he's the one to do it. Jephthah, on the other hand, what happened to Jephthah because of his family situation? did everybody just kind of put their arms around him and say, "We love you"?
And the similar thing was Abimelech, that he joins the worthless man, but then he gets invited to lead in the war.
So Jephthah does kind of get sent away. What is specifically said about Jephthah in the beginning, about some of his qualities?
Mighty man of valor.
All right, so he's a valiant warrior. So even though he is the son of a prostitute and he gets sent away, the people are in need, and so they turn to Jephthah. It's obvious that he was someone that had the ability to lead, and they saw that, regardless of who his mother was. And so now, when they're in a situation of need, well, we're going to turn to Jephthah. Kiara?
Couldn't help but notice that his rise to power was significantly more peaceful than what happened to Abimelech. There was a whole conspiracy behind Abimelech and a lot of violence involved for his leadership position.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, there is definitely a difference in how all that took place. And I think Francis kind of alluded to this, but you can even see within their, if you want to call it a reign, or their time as a leader, Jephthah was one that obviously God approved. Abimelech was one that was not approved by God. And again, I think Jephthah's was from a standpoint of recognizing who he was and his leadership abilities, not because of who his mom was, but because of his leadership abilities. And he was able to obviously judge the people with God's help legitimately. Whereas Abimelech, there was no legitimacy to his leadership and his being a judge at all. Anything else on number 4? Question number 5. Consider how Jephthah reasons with the king of Ammon before going to war. What does this reveal about his character and leadership, and how would you describe Jephthah's approach to the king of Ammon? How can this help us with conflict resolution? So again, for sake of time, we won't go through and read verses 12 through 28, but what do we see here with Jephthah and the way that he handles the king of Ammon? Jesse?
Well, Jephthah provided him with a factual history lesson, and he tries to reason with him to reconsider what he's about to do. He shows wisdom and maturity.
It is interesting. So he is trying to reason with him. He's very diplomatic about how he goes about this, but he's using the truth. He's using facts of how this all happened, and it's not just because Israel is just kind of taking their land, but he goes them or takes them through this history lesson of what actually took place, and how that they would not allow them to pass through, and that the king of Sihon again refused, and then ended up going to war against Israel. Israel won, and so they would recognize even in their minds, well, if your God gives you a victory, then that's yours. And so he is using that kind of reasoning with them as well there in verses 23 and 24. And so he's trying to help them understand, no, I mean, by every account, it's ours. Of course, Ammon didn't listen to the arguments, and so they went to war. But you do see this sense of diplomacy and reasoning. And I think that while Jephthah is trying to get the king of Ammon to understand, he's also trying to understand, where are you coming from? Why are you, forcing this? And so what can we learn from all of this just about conflict resolution and how we approach things?
We should strive for a peaceful solution.
Okay, so definitely strive for peace.
People discuss the problem in order to try to resolve issues before they escalate more.
Yeah. His mindset of, again, trying to understand the situation before just immediately going to war. Daddy?
That God is, doing all of this, not himself, and so he gave God all the glory for what was taking place, and that's what we should learn in our conflicts as well. Let God be involved in all the discussions and decisions that we make with our brethren.
Yes, there was definitely a reliance on God and a trust in God. that even shows through him giving him this history lesson. And so that is definitely something that we have to maintain and do ourselves. So was Jephthah going to just kind of bow down and give in? Okay, well, I tried, it didn't work, so I guess let's just go on our way. No, he was willing to defend what he knew was the right thing. And while, like Sister Sue said, we should try to maintain peace and unity, whenever that fails, we have to make sure that we stand for truth and that we continue to always fight for truth. And one of the other things, and we kind of mentioned this, but when we are in an issue of conflict with somebody else, having the facts, standing on the truth is something that is very important, and not just, well, this is the way I feel, but actually standing on facts and maybe even some history is something that would be beneficial. Anything else on number 5? Question number 6, how should Christians approach the making of vows and promises to God and others in the sight of Jephthah's story? And this is one of those Bible stories that I think is very well known, that we probably learn about from a very early age, and the situation with Jephthah and his daughter and the vow that was made. But what can this teach us about our vows? Miss Shirley?
Not to be rash with their mouth and heart, or hasty before God.
Okay. So don't be rash with our mouths or hasty. Norm?
God doesn't like vows. Wants you yes to be yes, and no to be no. That's the way Jesus put it. And so your character should be your vow.
Okay.
And so don't rely on that little false courage.
Yeah. I have this mindset, I guess, of vows as kind of a childish thing, because when you're with your friends or whatever, you don't believe each other, and so you got to start making promises, or you make a pinky promise. I will do this. I'm going to do this. We're going to. It's not just going to let our yes be yes and our no be no. Gil?
If you make a vow, we need to keep it. When people get married, a lot of times they call them vows. But later they're like, oh, but they changed, so I don't have to keep my vow. No, this shows, this story right here, he made a vow. Oh, but my daughter came out, I don't have to keep my vow. No, you need to keep your vow. Just don't make a vow if you don't think you can keep it.
Yes. And hopefully this is something that Sam and Maddie can speak to. This is something we actually just talked about here recently, and regardless of what your spouse does or does not do, God's vow, or the vow that you are making before God, is you're going to keep the vow that you made towards your husband, regardless of how your husband acts. And if you're the husband, you're going to keep the vows that you made to your wife, regardless of how the wife acts. It's not a conditional vow. God does not look at these things as conditional vows. Kiara?
Adding to his response, if we do make a vow, we have to be very careful what we bind ourselves under. In this case, Jephthah made a very rash vow, and I don't know what he was expected to come out of his house, but he did not obviously think it through that well, and he did keep his vow, but came with very dire consequences because he didn't think it through.
Yeah. There was not enough thought, and that's what Miss Shirley was saying. You can't make them hastily. You actually have to consider the consequences of your vow. Again, just like in a marriage relationship, you can't make these decisions hastily, and you are committing yourself, and so you can't make that decision hastily. Who are you pointing at, Norm? Miss Shirley?
Matthew 5:33, again you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely and perform your oaths to the Lord.
Yes. And I didn't have this, or the continuation of Ecclesiastes 5 listed in your questions, but obviously Ecclesiastes 5, 4, and 5 are very good ones to also add there. And it says, when you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it, for he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. And so, if we make a commitment to others, we should fulfill that commitment with all faithfulness and truth, recognizing that our word is also a reflection of God too. Norm?
The immaturity, the vow. God put a condition there on the vow, not because he liked vows, but it was one of those things where people were doing this, and so he had to come up with a way to make it conditional as far as how you were going to either make it work or you were going to be sinning. But it's the maturity thing that when you're a kid, you think everything's going to be the same. I did this today, and so tomorrow's going to be the same. And we have no foresight, and that's because we're humans. And that's why God doesn't like vows, is because we're to live for today. We're supposed to be focused on today, and we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, and thus you can't bet or wager against the future with a vow. You may not even be around.
Sam? And Norm did say earlier, is building on that, is the fact that vows, there would be no need for them. Everyone was just honest. That like the reason God makes vows, or he made vows with like patriarchs and with Israel, when there were these covenants that were made, it was because there was this acknowledgement that Israel wasn't going to remain faithful, and there were going to be points where they wouldn't reciprocate, his faith toward them, and because of that, they would receive the righteous discipline that they should have. Like when you think about Jesus saying things, Jesus, he knew the future. He didn't make vows as much as he would say, "No, truly I say to you," because everything that came out of his mouth was gospel, no pun intended. But like he didn't even feel the need to say anything other than, "Well, I'm saying the truth to you right now." And if we're in a perfect world where none of us are being dishonest, there would never be a point to making a vow, because he would just do as we say. And that is what Norm said.
Yeah, we should be people of integrity. We should be people that are dependable, that
are trustworthy. And as it says there in Matthew 5:37, but let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Any other comments on number 6? All right, number 7, what lessons can we learn from Jephthah's daughter's response to her fate? There in verses 36 and 37. Ken?
Well, she was very courageous, and she accepted her fate because the Lord had delivered them from the Ammonites, and so she felt that her father's vow was very important to be kept, and so she, even though it cost her life.
it's interesting.
It's almost like she was a little more mature in this than even her dad, who made the rash vow, but I think she is acknowledging the fact that he made a vow and he's not going to be able to break that. Now, Jephthah in his own mind maybe, but she's not going to let him break that, because she knows that it is a vow that was made to God. Other thoughts? Norm?
She put God's law above herself. Because Jephthah made the vow, she just by happenstance, she happened to be there. Whether there was anything that she could have done to redeem the vow, I don't know, but she chose to adhere to God's law and what God had stated on this thing, rather than make any fight against it. Because it wasn't her vow. She was simply pulled into being a part of it. But she chose to follow God's law on that matter. And that's the hard thing. But it's not even our fault. We just happen to be involved. But the decision is the same. We follow God or not.
So, with this whole story, we see there are consequences of our vows, and oftentimes there are sacrifices that have to be made. And I'm speaking in general terms, sacrifices that have to be made. And again, just because of Sam and Maddie, the marriage thing is really on my mind. And so within a marriage relationship, the vows that you make, there are consequences that come from you making this vow to the other one. And yes, oftentimes there are sacrifices that you have to make in order to fulfill that vow. And despite the tragedy of the situation, his daughter was willing to be selfless in this situation and make sure that her father kept the vow. So this was not one of the questions, but Brother Ken had mentioned that she was killed. So does anybody have any thoughts on that? Was Jephthah's daughter like literally offered as a burnt offering? Was she killed, Daddy?
Well, he didn't really say she was killed. He said she was sacrificed her life. So I took it as sacrificing her life to God, the remainder of her life.
Okay.
Because the reason is because, throughout the scriptures of the Old Testament, God was against sacrificing human beings. And I don't think in this case that's not what these passages would mean. I don't think he offered his daughter as a physical sacrifice to God. That was also against God's laws of what was required to offer sacrifices to him. And so,
All right. Let me get Lena and then I'll get Norm.
Well, he kind of said what I was going to say. I read that. This is not my thought. When I was studying for this lesson, people having this opinion that God does not like human sacrifice and he would not be okay with a person sacrificing their child. Yes, he requested Isaac's sacrifice, but eventually Isaac did not get sacrificed, did not get burned. So yes, people speculate that just like Hannah promised that if she has a male son, she will give him to service to God, and therefore that was her sacrifice to God. So the same idea. When I talked to Jesse, he disagreed. He thinks burnt offering is burnt offering.
Jesse, your husband, not Jesse's wife.
My Jesse, yes.
All right, Norm.
Well, we know that an offering to the Lord, when it is one child, isn't a burnt offering. The child isn't killed. And we know this because Samuel's mother offered a child to God if he would just give one to her. And that offering was he would serve God. Even though he was not a priest, he wasn't part of that tribe, but he was given to the service of God. And if that's how God handles one who wants to offer to him of their child, that it would appear to be what happened to her. She would mourn the fact that she would not know a man, she would not be a wife, but she would serve God the rest of her life in whatever capacity he gave.
Okay. Let's see another hand. Gil.
I don't know if it's entirely clear, but the vow was that he would offer as a burnt offering. That means something has to die, from what I remember studying the old law. And it says in verse 39 that he carried out his vow with her, which he had vowed. So, if you just read it word for word, it sounds like he had to offer up and kill her, but it doesn't specifically say that he killed her.
Kiara.
It is also worth noting that if she was indeed sacrificed as a burnt offering, then God himself would not have accepted it, but it still would have had to happen. Just like how he didn't accept the marriage issues that were going on with Israel, with their polygamy and things like that, he allowed it to happen with the certificate of divorce, but that wasn't what he ultimately wanted for the marriage relationship, which is then integrated into the new law. So I wonder if this is an example of one of those to where God himself may not approve of this on a regular basis, but because it was a vow, he had to keep it. Seems me think of that.
All right. Todd, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just find it hard to understand the commemoration, the annual commemoration as well, if she continues to live on for decades, just in the service of God. Like, no one was lamenting the death of Samuel when he went to serve in the temple.
Other comments? Ms. Shirley?
If I understood the reading in all this, she was to remain a virgin. She was not to marry.
All right, so you can see from the discussion
And I went totally against what Brother Waldron said in his book. He basically said, there's no point in discussing this. So my apologies, but I do think it's interesting to have these discussions. Do I think I don't think that it is clear. I mean, my opinion is no, she wasn't. I think that she specifically asked for 2 months to bewail her virginity, and she didn't grieve over her short life, but she was grieving over the fact of her virginity here. And but does it matter in our faith? No. And so obviously Lena and Jesse are still married. They're not. they don't agree, and that's fine. I don't think that we have to necessarily agree on these things, but I do think it's interesting to consider. And this is a very well-known story when we talk about the vow of Jephthah and what it actually meant to her daughter. So I was just I didn't want to discuss it just for a minute, but not because I wanted to start some kind of huge disagreement. Norm?
This happens a number of times throughout the Bible where God's not necessarily clear on what the actual outcome is, but no matter what the outcome happened to be, there were lessons to be learned. However you did it. So you could still come to a unity even though you might not. God in himself did not provide the detail because he didn't feel it was necessary, but the lessons of the story were still there no matter how.
Still there, still valuable.
Yep.
All right, question number 8.
It's like, why isn't this working? It's because my computer's talking to me. It's trying to shut itself down. Now let's see. Nope. Okay. And we thought we only had issues with everything else. All right. Yeah, this is all me. Question number 8. Hebrews 11 mentions Jephthah in the list of those who were said to have acted by faith. How was Jephthah's faith displayed?
April?
In 11:29, we see now the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and so we see his dependence upon God and fulfilling God's command here.
Okay, all right, so his dependence upon God, there in verse 29, chapter 11. What else? One of the things that we
Pointed out, and to me, the ones up to Jephthah are, in my feeble mind, a little easier to kind of come up with some reasons. We'll talk about Samson in our next lesson, and that one, I'll admit, it's a little harder for me, but he's still listed in Hebrews chapter 11. But with Jephthah, the thing we pointed out, none of these people are perfect. Okay, they've got some major flaws. All of them have flaws. But yet they are listed in what we call this hall of faith, or the hall of fame of faith, and they're listed right along Abraham and Moses and some of these others. And so there's a reason for that. So his reliance, his dependence upon God. What else?
Yes.
Well, since faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God, he received God's instructions and ultimately he went out and performed it.
Okay.
Fight him.
So even though...
And I would go all the way back to the very beginning there in chapter 11, where he is kind of banned, he's sent away, and as Lena pointed out, he's kind of with these worthless men, but they're still, because of what we read in a couple of verses, there still has to be an understanding of who God is, because in verse 9 of chapter 11 it says, "So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you take me back to fight against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gives them up to me, will I become your head?" And so he is agreeing to do this, but he's actually showing his reliance on God even at this point, and the Lord gives them to me. He's understanding, yes, I'm a valiant warrior, but it's not going to be because of my strength, but if the Lord actually gives this victory, then will I be your head. Also in verse 11 there of chapter 11, it says, "Then Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and chief over them, and Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah." And so again, in the beginning, he's even showing this reliance on God. And so I think in his victories, his battles, I think that we see his reliance on God, and and him recognizing that it is through God that he is going to have these victories. And I think all that reflects his faith. Anything else on number 8, Norm?
The Hebrews 11 comment, we can see that faith does not look the same as far as from the standpoint of the power of the faith that the person had, what was done that demonstrated their faith. I mean, that is that list in Hebrews 11. If we went through a step-by-step on how they demonstrated their faith, each one of them, it would be very, very different. So the lesson, I mean, for us is that we're all at different levels and talents and abilities and maturity of our faith. But God can still use us wherever we are today. And that's the thing we should be contented about, happy about, joyous about. We don't have to wait 20 years, get stronger before I can do something. Or, if I was only 20 years younger, then I could really, really do something. God can use us now. We need to realize that.
Yeah. Anything else, Todd? I think that we think a lot about the tragedy of, or the foolishness of his vow, but when you think of the faith of Abraham, we usually point to his pinnacle moment being the moment where he was willing to sacrifice his son. And so this story of him sacrificing his daughter, whether it was keeping her a virgin or actually killing her, that was his willingness to do exactly what he had said. And it was in connection to conquering Ammon. I'll do this, Lord, if you will let me conquer Ammon. And so it's quite a story of faith. Yeah, and that's a
really good point. We often look at it from the negative standpoint of being rash, but I don't believe in any way, shape, or form Jephthah was doing this because he didn't actually think it was going to happen. He's making a vow to God because he knows God is going to be able to fulfill this. And so, yes, I agree. I think that is definitely a sign of his faith there. Anything else on number 8? All right, just for the sake of time, we'll kind of skip over number 9. We've kind of talked about some of the issues with the Ephraimites and their pride. One of the things that I will point out, so they've complained now multiple times that they weren't as much of a part of these victories as what they thought they should be. Some of it is, Brother Waldron points out in his book, is probably even from a sense of selfishness, where if you're a part of these victories, what typically happens to the victor of any kind of battle? I saw Brother Bill kind of mouthing spoils, and so yeah, we get to take all the spoils, and so sometimes that can be a great thing to add to our wealth, and so some of it may be a sense of selfishness as well, where they're not able to get maybe as much as they thought. But regardless, we know that it is definitely a sense of pride and not a true reliance on God for the victory. So let's go ahead and switch over to lesson 9. Couldn't remember if we were, I almost said 10. That's where we at least should be, but we're still on 9. So you can understand my own confusion. All right, so we're talking now about the latter judges, in particular Samson for sure. So question number 1 says, consider Judges 13 verse 18 and the response the angel of the Lord gives to Manoah when asked his name. What's significant about the response, and considering the broader context of Scriptures, how does this answer connect with other biblical references to God's nature and attributes? So Judges 13 verse 18, the New American Standard says, but the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? The King James Version says, and the angel of the Lord said unto him, why askest thou thus after my name, seeing it is secret? And then the NIV says, he replied, why do you ask my name? It is beyond understanding. So what do you take away from that? Ken?
Well, I was just reading the New King James. I didn't check the other translations, but it reminded me of Isaiah 9 verse 6, where it talks about Jesus is a wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And I felt like this angel of the Lord is a reference to Jesus Christ himself.
Okay, so we do have this.
Yes, this reoccurring, I guess, Bible theme of God and how he should be marveled. And Isaiah 9:6 there, where he is referred to as wonderful counselor. What else? Gil?
I was going to say, we don't know a lot about angels. I mean, they're scattered throughout the whole Bible, but I mean, if they speak in a different language, there's some kind of inferences of that, even in Revelation and stuff. So we may not be able to pronounce their name if it's in a different language, or even make the sounds. There's a lot of unknowns there.
Okay. So I think that just looking at the different translations, and if you actually look at the Greek, at least what I come away with, is it probably is best to be translated as wonderful. But you do have this sense of, with these other translations, of it kind of being beyond understanding, and that is something that obviously it's hard for us to understand the nature of God. And we think about when God is even talking about himself over in Isaiah 55:8 and 9, his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. When we see the situation where Moses is being sent, and Moses is trying to ask, well, who am I going to tell him, is sending me? And his response is, I am who I am. And so I think that there is this sense of not easily being able to comprehend, but there is also this sense of majesty and wonder that go along with God and his nature. Anything else on number 1? Number 2, Samson is often portrayed as a man of extraordinary physical strength, but in Judges 14:1-9, we see a different side of Samson. Compare and contrast Samson's strengths and his weaknesses or vulnerability. What lessons can we learn from Samson's character? And I kind of highlighted chapter 14, verses 1-9. We see this all the way through the end, even over in chapter 16, before he marries Delilah. I mean, we see a lot of, weaknesses maybe with Samson throughout his life. So what do you take away from his strengths versus his weaknesses, and what we learn about his character? Norm?
I'll start off with weakness, his impatience. He had little patience, if any.
All right, so he's impatient. Get her for me? Yeah. What else?
It's got a weakness for women, foreign women, insistent to get his way, which ties into impatience. His focus is on fleshly qualities, it seems, the outward, not spiritual. And he's not honest with his parents. Doesn't share things with them.
Yeah, we see he's intentionally trying to hide things from his parents, probably for good reason, because they weren't things that they would be proud of and were proud of. There's a sense of emotional weakness where he has this great physical strength, but then yet he is he really is emotionally driven with a lot of the things that he does, and that's not just with his lust for women, but we see it even in his anger and the way that he responds. Once the riddle is told back to him, it's not like they figured it out, but we see his anger. So he makes a lot of impulsive decisions just based on his emotions. He has, in most situations, a severe lack of self-control. And I think that's one of his major liabilities, is his lack of self-control. And that leads to a lot of issues from chapter 14 all the way through chapter 16. Dave?
He had a lack of respect, for his parents. They gave him advice on what they thought he should do, and he didn't listen to that. Of course, that goes along with what Jesse said as well. But I noticed that, but he was a fairly witty man. He was pretty smart, actually, in some things.
Yeah, I think that sometimes that he definitely was pretty smart. I think even with Delilah, I think he was playing a game. And I think he thought he was going to be the wiser one, and ultimately he was not. Let me get Sam, and then Noel.
Yeah, I think oftentimes, I at least catch myself thinking, if I had more maybe direct evidence. If I had more, this closer understanding of God's power and like what He's doing directly for me, then I would be a stronger Christian. And I would be more prone to be more faithful, to make better decisions, because I now see more closely what God does for me on a daily basis. And I think when I look at someone like Samson, who is a man who's been given an incredible blessing, and yet see that he still has weaknesses, and that those weaknesses may even come from how he uses and misuses the power that he's been given. I guess that's a good reminder for me. It keeps me in my mind in check for it. Like when you see like Jesus talking to the disciples about divorce, and when some of them are like, well, why should anyone even get married if they're not allowed to divorce? And he says, because there are some men, not all men can handle this, or whatever. And for it to be someone like Samson, who you would think is one of the most powerful men in history, to still have that weakness, and it shows that he's not above anyone else, and what he has, and he's just as vulnerable.
All right, Norm?
When I think of Samson, I think of arrogance, lack of humility, arrogance towards God, and the blessings that he has, that he's been given. I mean, it's just he just doesn't see that. And of course, a big part of his punishment is going to be humbling him, and he's going to fall hard as a result of that.
Yeah. In any way, shape, or form, we cannot rely on what we deem as our own strength, whether that's physical
strength, whether it's strength of mind, whether it's strength of our bank account. And I think that one of the things that we learn from Samson is to rely on God, not to rely on our own strengths. And I think of Isaiah 31 verse 1, woe to those who go down to Egypt to help and rely on horses and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong, but they do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor seek the Lord. So God makes those strengths stand or fall at His command. Over in Obadiah 1, 3 and 4, it says, the arrogance of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock, and the loftiness of your dwelling place, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to earth? Though you built high like the eagle, though you set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. God is in control whether we trust Him or not. And I think the narrative of Samson really teaches us to rely on God and His strength, and not any source of strength that we may have. Thanks, everybody. We'll pick up with question number 3 in less than 9 next week.